All right, welcome to this celebration of Harold Burson today, a man who certainly defines a life well lived. Many of you have traveled quite a distance to get here today, and all of you know by now it's tough to get to Oxford, Mississippi. But we know that the family certainly appreciates each and every one of you coming today and journeying here to celebrate the life of Harold Burson. Thank you so much. You honor us and the family with your presence today. For most of us gathered here today, Harold Burson is a well-known commodity. In addition to family, friends, colleagues, and business associates who span decades, each and every one of you share a special bond with Harold that goes to the very greatness of this man. In a large and small way, each of you carry forward the legacy of this great man. The fact that this occasion takes place here in Oxford, Mississippi, on the campus of the University of Mississippi, is particularly appropriate. I've been told to know Harold Burson, one must first travel to Ole Miss to experience where his journey began. Harold was deeply proud of this institution, and he often shared how the facts that if it had been absent the opportunity to gain an education here, his story would have been very different. How fitting that all of you would be here today and in an interesting twist of fate to welcome Harold home. My name is John Clark. Even though I never had the privilege of meeting Mr. Burson, I've read several articles and listened to many of his interviews online in the last couple of weeks and learned so much of Mr. Burson and his many accomplishments through that and through his son, Mark. Mark, in addition to holding a Bachelor of Science in Divinity and a Doctorate of Theology, I own and run Oxford Muffler and Auto Service here in Oxford. That's where I had the pleasure of meeting Mark. He's a customer of ours, but in the short time between his father's passing and this event, I have come to appreciate the significance of Mr. Burson's life. The world is a better place because of all that he did and all that he was. But far be it for me to offer my perspective on Harold's extraordinary life. I'll leave that to all the people that were better equipped to tell Harold's story. Today, we'll hear from a selection of his close business associates, his colleagues, caregivers, and his family members, who in total will help to offer a perspective on his life, a life that was well lived. Today, following this service, you're invited to go to the Lyceum for a reception that will follow. Let us pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
I'm Don Baer. What a wonderful gathering. This is just an amazing group of people to be here for Harold Burson. Beware of Jewish boys from the South. They will surprise you. I know a bit about this as a Jewish guy who grew up in North Carolina. It's part of how we take to the world, uncertain sometimes where we fit, yet hoping to make a mark, edging up to the good and the great, and once in a while, with luck, achieving escape velocity before they notice. In some ways, no one was ever full of more surprises than Harold Burson of Memphis, Tennessee, and Oxford, Mississippi. When you would least expect it throughout his life, there was a new way. Harold seemed to follow the famous advice of Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. to live a truly meaningful life, share what he called the action and passion of your times. There are probably 1,000 people, many of them here today, even more, who deserve to be here more than I do to explain how the great person we are remembering shared in that action and passion. And there are tens of thousands, even more, who could be here now telling us how much Harold meant to them, how he inspired them, and yes, how he surprised them in ways that changed their lives forever. So I want to thank the Burson family for this profound honor to express in a modest way some part of what I know is in the hearts of so many people in the face of our loss. Thank you. Harold's surprises always kind of crept up on you, because in his general matter-of-the-fact way, he let his experiences speak for themselves. Here's a few that I remember. One morning in 2011, we woke up to learn from a New York Times column, which Harold had quietly cooperated with, that he had witnessed the famous Nuremberg trials in Germany following World War II. He was there living history as a 24-year-old GI reporter telling the whole world the story of how the Nazi criminals were finally brought to justice. 24 years old. Then there was the revelation when Harold casually mentioned to me one day that here at Ole Miss in 1937, as a 17-year-old student stringer for the Memphis Commercial Appeal, earning 14 cents per column inch, he actually interviewed a writer named William Faulkner. I think you all know about William Faulkner, right? I think Harold knew that as a fellow Southerner far away from home like him for so many years up north, it would mean the world to me to learn that he had actually known and talked with one of the heroes that we shared. And once, at a holiday party, he stopped a bunch of us very short when he started this sentence this way. Every time I saw Frank Sinatra, he would tell me. With a build-up like that, it hardly mattered how Harold finished the sentence, and frankly, I don't remember how he did. It's true that Harold knew, advised, and was deeply respected by a stunning array of major figures from the extraordinary century he lived. Presidents of the United States, titans of global business, superstars of one kind or another, including even the chairman of the board, Sinatra himself. Yet none of these stars ever mattered more to Harold than any one of the nearly 35,000 people who worked at one time or another at the firm he founded almost 7 decades ago, or the many, many others who knew him as a wise counsel and dear friend. I knew about the legend Harold Burson long before I knew him. For many years, close friends of mine who had benefited from his advice told me I had to meet Harold. To a person, they said he was a wise man who could give me invaluable counsel about my life and career, and they knew how much I needed it. Time and circumstances would always get away from me, and I figured Harold might not really want to be bothered. So I never followed my friend's advice then. What a mistake. Fortunately, fate had a way of making possible what I had failed to do myself. In the dozen years I worked at the firm Harold founded and nurtured until his death, I discovered what everyone else who encountered him always knew about him. He cared, and his caring was real and went to the core of who he was. People are the only real assets we have. Those Harold Burson words were his fundamental philosophy about how to succeed in business. They were also the essential credo of his life. He understood that in our field, as in most things in life that are worth doing, The judgment, creativity, and ideas that drive what we do depend more than anything on the quality of talented individuals and teams. It's the people, start to finish. And in life, as in business, Harold never wavered in his belief that people were at the heart of what made it all worthwhile. This came through loud and clear in how Harold treated everyone, no matter what levels in life they had reached. He showed it in the small touches that always stood out in big ways, and I remember them so well. The encouraging meetings with those who had just started at the firm, he would meet with all of them. His notes of congratulations about a piece of good work, boy, did that mean a lot when you got one. And his resolute yet always kind advice when something wasn't going as hoped. I heard those too. In truth, Harold had a secret weapon that made his grand success possible. He knew if he expected the best from people, showed them the possibility he saw in them, and treated them as though they expected the same from themselves, then people would rise to be their best selves. He did it when he guided his clients to connect business value with good personal values and help them to do the right thing in hard times. He did it when he helped thousands of communications professionals, many of whom are here today, young ones and not so young ones, from every corner of the world find a better path forward for their clients and not take the easy way out. He especially did it when he took brave steps to give the opportunity to rise to people who would not have otherwise had it. He was a pioneer in promoting women and minorities to top positions in his firm and across the PR sector that he nearly created himself, knocking down barriers, opening paths forward that made them and all of us better at what we could do. He did all that when it was far from ordinary, and in fact, when others warned it was risky. He did it because he knew it was the right thing to do. You, his family, deserve to be proud of him for that. Yes, Harold's secret weapon was that almost everyone he encountered sensed in him someone who cared about them and always wanted them to do better. In return, people, who are those only real assets in business and in life, gave Harold back their respect and their love. I'm reminded of one of my favorite lines from another writer with deep roots in these parts, Walker Percy. Walker Percy wrote, "To become aware of the possibility of the search is to be onto something. Not to be onto something is to be in despair." I think of that line when I remember one of the last surprising moments I had with Harold. It was 9 months ago, during the next to the last long conversation we had together. We were at a meeting of the Economic Club of New York, which was one of Harold's favorite haunts, and the speaker was our client, the Chief Executive Officer of Bank of America, and Harold loved being there in that setting, knowing that the Chief Executive Officer was one of his clients. During the lunch, we talked for quite a while, and he smiled and he told me how much he wanted to make it to his 100th birthday, then just a year and a half away. He'd been working through physical issues due to his broken hip, but he never seemed to let it get him down. So with that twinkle in his eye that was all his, and you all know what I mean, he said to me without a single drop of irony in his voice, "All I want to do now is drive down the court, stuff the ball in the basket, and make that goal of being 100. We both laughed really, really hard. Well, Harold didn't quite hit that very last basket, but he sure gave it all he had. What he was telling me that spring day was that he would never give up on being onto something. He was ceaselessly onto the possibility of the search of life that was the essence of his life. No despair at all. Always another goal. He never, ever stopped believing tomorrow could be better than today, and that each one of us, each one of you that he believed in, has a part of it. Beyond everything else, that's the amazing legacy Harold Burson left us all. And knowing Harold, as you all did, as so many thousands of others did, there's simply no surprise in it. No surprise at all. Thank you.
I love Harold Burson. Kind of want to just get that point right away. I love the man, and I've loved him for more than 30 years. And let me explain my use of present tense there, because we are in a university, and you might not think that's the appropriate one. But a favorite of this university, William Faulkner, famously said, "The past is never dead." In fact, it's not even past. And in my world, the public relations professional world, a world that Harold helped shape and enhance immeasurably for most of the past century, Harold's influence will never die. In fact, it's just prologue. While this is a sad day for us here in Oxford and throughout Harold's professional world, I couldn't help, the moment I heard the news, feeling this overwhelming sense of gratitude for the many years of friendship and mentorship I've had with him, and for the profound and positive impact he made on so many for so long. So here we are in this beautiful setting, in his beloved university, but let's not mourn Harold's passing. Let's really celebrate his remarkable spirit, which for legions of his admirers around the world, and some of whom are here today, will endure forever. We remember him not so much for, we remember him for his extraordinary business successes, but many people are successful in business and they're not Harold Burson, and they don't have the reverence that he's earned. And so yes, we admire his extraordinary client relationships. We admire the success he had in growing Burson Marsteller to a global powerhouse. We admired the courage he showed in taking those risks along the way to build that. But as Faulkner also wrote, you cannot swim for new horizons unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. Well, Harold never stopped swimming for new horizons, and we love him for that too. What truly set him apart, Don alluded to this, was not just what he did, but how he did it. He conducted business with a higher purpose forever. He exemplified the attributes one sees in only the greatest leaders: professionalism, character, integrity, empathy, humility, resilience, openness, communication, generosity, and a deep, lifelong respect for diverse ideas and diverse talent. And most of all, he stood for us, especially the 35,000 strong who had the good fortune to be employees or clients of Burson Marsteller over the years. Harold always believed that the key to success was how you empowered your people to go beyond what you yourself can achieve and to inspire and enable others to accomplish far more than they ever imagined they could. Perhaps that conviction was what drove him drove him as well to be a great and early proponent of diversity and inclusion. He was a renowned champion in our professional world as a steadfast champion and mentor of diverse talent. And when asked his greatest client success, I think a number of us in this room know, he would then tell you in considerable detail about the project he worked on for his beloved alma mater on a diversity-related issue. And I heard the tale 50 times and loved it every one. I'll always remember what one of his dear professional friends, who's actually here with us today, said about him. He said, 30 years ago, Professor Don Wright said, 30 years ago, Harold Burson put his arm around me and he never let go. And when Don said that in a room with a group of people from all over our professional world, everybody in the room was looking at each other and saying, that's me too. Well, that was me too. He didn't like that when I said that to him, though, because he said, well, I'm not going to put my arm around you. But I think he liked hearing it anyway. I first met Harold in 1984 in, of all places, Tokyo, in a hotel lobby in Tokyo. I was working at the time for a Washington think tank, and we had just completed a successful round of conferences in Tokyo. and we were getting ready to move on. And one of the members of our delegation also happened to be an advisor to Harold. And this gentleman, a brilliant and renowned diplomat named Philip Habib, took me by the arm and he pointed across the lobby at a very distinguished gentleman and he said, "Do you know who that is?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, come with me and I'm going to introduce you because he's one of the smartest people in the world and he's in your business." And that was Harold Burson. And so, a few years later, when somebody from Burson Marsteller called me at a point where I was not looking for a job and tried to recruit me, I leapt at the chance to go and work with Yoda for a while and to learn from and figure out whether I could be any good at this business. Keep in mind, I was 38 years old at the time. And I was 38 years old at the time. Harold was the age I am now. And that started a loving relationship for the next 30 years. That gives me hope, too, by the way, on a personal level. But in any case, the chance to work with the gentleman who would later be declared by our top PR trade publication as the most influential PR person in the 20th century. And you know, Harold often said that we all have defining moments in our life. Well, for me, that was a defining moment, and I'll never forget it. Harold's success resulted from more than just being a lovable guy. He had an amazing BS detector. And even though he was not a confrontational type, he never feared speaking truth to power. I saw him do this artfully with, as Don was alluding to, with CEOs in a range of industries, and they came away, they didn't get mad at him, they appreciated it because of a couple of things, I think. First of all, the insights and the ideas were brilliant. But second, they knew he understood their business, and he cared about their business, and he loved their brands. And I was thinking this the other day because I was sitting in his office one day, and a very prominent CEO called, and Harold, in his typical polite fashion, said, "Mind if I take this call?" I said, "Sure, sure. You want me to leave?" No, it's okay. So I heard the call. And the CEO had a proposal on his desk for a new promotion that everybody in his firm, his company, were telling him he should do. And he wanted to just get Harold's take on it. And Harold thought for a second, and he said, "I really think that would undercut the essence of the brand that you and your predecessors have been building for forever." And at the very least, so what they decided to do was basically do some more research on it. But you know, many people in that position, what Harold could have done was tell him what he wanted to hear. It sounded like he wanted to hear it was a great idea, and then tell him how Burson Marsteller could sell him a great program to promote it, right? But he was never a day trader. He was never thinking about what he could sell that day. He was in it for the long term in his personal relationships with all of us and in his business relationships. And so he told that CEO, "You really need to think twice about this." And they went back and did some research and they killed the idea. And that gentleman, who I was with the two of them later, and he was very grateful to Harold for doing that. I can't tell any of you, even all these years later, but you'd know exactly what I mean if I told you what it was. He told me that top executives are frequently fed what they want to hear. And what they need from people like us is, do we have the courage to resist that temptation? The great leaders, the really great leaders, know they need to be true to their values and their reputations, even if it costs them money to do so. George Orwell once wrote, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." Harold had a unique propensity for that kind of truth-telling. And wouldn't today's world be so much better if our leaders around the world adhered to the kind of values and principles that Harold Burson embodied? Orwell also wrote, "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." So let's remember Harold not just as the most influential PR professional of the past century, and not just as a wonderful boss and friend, and not just as a loving spouse and dad and devoted grandfather, and not just as really the ultimate mensch, the person who was a revered friend for so many years. I'd like to propose that we remember him instead as Harold Burson, revolutionary truth teller.
Good afternoon. My name is Shuri Fukunaga, and I come from Tokyo. I had been working with Burson Tokyo for quite some time. And I'm one who, as many of you, hold deep admiration, also appreciation and respect for Harold Burson. As do a lot of my former colleagues, as well as a lot of our clients in Japan, as well as a lot of people in the industry and business in Japan. But first things first, I do want to offer my condolences to the family, because Mark, Scott, losing a father it hurts. But slowly, I can tell you from, not that, like we're around the same age, of course, but losing a parent earlier was probably the memories, the good memories that last. This will start to soften the pain, although the gap will never go away. There's always a hole for a parent because they hold a special place. And this goes for also the grandchildren. I'm sure the passing of a parent also is actually, and I also want to say that it is a biggest lesson that perhaps a parent could give their children and their grandchildren. And that is, life is not mortal, so wake up each morning and live to the fullest. In fact, last year, June, I think, I had the privilege of meeting Harold at his apartment in New York over breakfast. And thanks to many of you, I was able to do this, and I'm very thankful for that. And of the 3.5 hours I was with him over the morning, talking, half of the discussion was actually about the family. It was about Scott Yu. We were talking about the fact that you had come to Japan just with Wendy, just 2 or 3 weeks earlier, and how you had enjoyed the stay and the sushi. And his comment was, well, Scott always had an international palate, more than mine. I also talked to him about the fact that you told me that you selected law rather than follow in his father's profession, PR. And that the reason why you did that was because, well, his father is a big challenge to overcome if he followed the profession of PR. So he chose law, where he can excel. And he was very proud of that. And he had expressed a little bit of a Cheshire smile, cat smile, a little bit wicked, a little bit mean, but a little, and it had this meaning, it had this, both sides of it, I think, that one, Scott is right, he's wise. But at the same time, that he was very proud of his son. We also talked about you, Mark. And I told him, I never worked with you. I never worked with you when you were with Burson Marsteller, and I wish I did. But he was telling me a lot about you, and also because your son, Win, was in Japan, accompanying his father to the Japan trip, we talked about you. He talked about his grandchildren, but he talked about you, and you know what he said? He said, Win was maybe out of all my grandchildren, he resembles me in terms of thinking the most. Is that true? And he talked about also Esther, because Esther too had come to Japan. He had accompanied his father to Japan, and it was a great trip. And he was, because I think Esther was living in New York and visiting him frequently, as Win had been, he appreciated her coming, and she expressed very much of a pride in the fact that Esther was getting a doctorate degree in what was called psychology and social intervention. And I said, social intervention, what is this? And he talked for another, I don't know what, but I don't know whether I understood it, but, but that was that. But most of all, in the 3.5 hours half family time discussion, he talked a lot about your mother, about Betty, and how they had met, how they had dated, and he knew that she was going to be your mother, and that they was Scotty, the name of the dog. That came the the dog topic came out, the grandchildren's topic came out too. Then also that they had brought up how Betty had helped him establish Burson Marsteller in the early days. That she was very instrumental in keeping the books and doing all these things. And without her, Burson Marsteller would not exist. And that they had bought a house in Scarsdale, and that they wanted that to build a happy home for their sons. He really missed Betty, I think. And so, most probably, if ever you feel that he wasn't the real Harold, who resisted, who always had the spirit in him, who always wanted to be young, and he was in mind and spirit, most probably it was Betty who was calling him. And, Harold, you better come over here. Most probably that's what she was saying. And, by the way, resisting to age. Harold was resistant to age. He was resisting to age because when I visited New York, he would whisper to me and said, "You know what? I get the best care. I have all these people working, and they're so wonderful to me, and I appreciate that so much. But I don't want to be cared too much," he said. And I think that was his expression of saying, I don't want to get old, perhaps. But then he knew that he was getting old. That morning, when I visited Harold, was a very important visit for me because I wanted to put a sentimental closure to the 14 years of Burson Marsteller that I had returned to. In fact, altogether, this was my second tenure for altogether, it was 23 years that I had been with Burson Marsteller. It was my home, but I was putting a closure to that. And, oh, did we talk a lot over warmed up cinnamon buns and coffee? We talked about his health, of course, and he wanted to know how the company in Tokyo was doing, although by the time I had left. He also talked about Bill Marsteller, about his partner that he really respected. And he told me a little bit about his personality and all this, which I thought appreciated, just to understand the history of the company. We talked about developments in Asia, and especially because I am from Japan, the globalization of Japanese companies, which is a pet topic, which it fluctuates all the time. Maybe it will globalize well, maybe it will not. It's always on a pendulum swing. And through those, he was always supportive that it will happen one day, it will happen one day. And it was our common pet topic, Japanese companies. And he also expressed a little bit of a worry about the world that the younger generation is coming into and had to make decisions in, the grandchildren. He expressed a little bit of worry in that way because the world had become so complex, so layered, so that something like a pure, simple thank you may not be interpreted in the same way, when a thank you was meant to be a thank you. So he was worried about that and the thinking that maybe his grandchildren had so much to worry about, and he didn't want that. He really didn't. He wanted the grandchildren to be living in a better world, as my former boss Pat had said. You know, like he wanted to make the world, and I think Don had said to me he wanted to make the world a better place. But what we really agreed on was the world has indeed changed. But change doesn't mean it has to go to the negative. It can go for the better. Another thing he told me was, start your own company, he said. And use your name on it, he said. And do it fast while the momentum is there in Japan. So he told that to me, which I think was words that hit me. And as soon as I came home to Japan, I tried to address that. There are many, many things that I learned from Harold, not only from this 3.5-hour conversation, which was a rarity for me, to tell you the truth, because I live beyond that pond. You know, I don't physically live in New York or Washington, and therefore I do not get to meet him too much, and it's a pleasure to, but that was in itself a treasure, the discussion that I had. But it's also from what he's doing, what he has done, how he did it, that I think we learned a lot. We learned so much. I learned from him, first, to have faith in people. People, give them the opportunity, give them the knowledge. And you know, this morning I was walking around the campus, and I was so surprised because there was a sculpture of two students and one woman teacher in huddle, and the title of that was Mentor. There was another statue, I think, of a young man going through an arch, and on the chart it said courage. On the reverse side it said opportunity. Left side perseverance, right side I think it said knowledge. And these words actually really reflect our beloved mentor. These are the words that, and perhaps it is this here, the atmosphere, the everything that really created him. Although, of course, his upbringing, etc., it really matters. His parents, everything, it matters. But something in here about those words, something there rings a bell about Harold. And that's, this morning I felt very good about that when I took a walk around this campus. He also said, as Dawn and Pat had said, he gave the young people opportunity by giving them lots of training and giving them knowledge because he would talk to them. And most probably he was thinking, and he didn't express this, but this is my take on how he was thinking, and that is, look, we do have to respect people's comments, opinions, whether they be individuals, whether they be, like wrong or not, younger or old, woman or man, it doesn't matter. Like age, cultures, nationalities. Give them a voice and listen. And he listened. And I think that derives from the fact that the world is not made by a majority. It's made up of many. It's an aggregate of many minorities. And I think he understood that. And I think that's why he, that combined with foresight, another trait that he had, foresight, and that was back in 1973. I joined the company in 1985 the first time. 1973. Can you imagine putting yourself in the shoes of Harold Burson, the entrepreneur, going out and say, I'm going to start growing this business to be global. We're going to go to Japan. We're going to go to Hong Kong. 1973. And that was a time when Japan was being industrialized, and most probably he saw the opportunity, that growth, that the need of corporations and the conscience of corporations was important would also be important. But he was looking at Japan from a different language, from outside. He didn't have the language, but he was looking. But he would ask people, his friends, to give him the knowledge, and he was very good at asking. After all, the world is round, and what happens in one market affects the other. There's dynamics, it's almost like the law of physics. And then forthrightness, is that correct? Forthrightness. And I think, Pat, you had mentioned that he was very straightforward in his consultations. He wouldn't really conclude on his own, but he would ask the right questions to guide you so that in the end you're saying, yeah, this is what I mean, I think I should do that. And that's Harold's way. He would guide you to your own conclusions. And otherwise, he would tie a dot and a dot together, and it would be the shortest distance rather than going roundabout in a fuzzy way. What he said was very, very clear. And I think it also comes down to his belief in what we call common sense. Actually, Harold, to me, is a compass of common sense. He's also a compass to me in terms of professional decisions. Finally, friendship. I've learned a lot about friendship from Harold, and friendships in different forms. Think of this whole room, different people, different countries, different worlds, different values, but we're here together. And he brought them together as friends. And some of these people in the room are my lifetime friends. He had that magic. He had that magic to bring about friendship, to tie people together. Whether he was directly involved, no, he never pulled, for example, Curtis Chin and me and said, look, you become friends. But he was there, he was the common denominator. Somehow he was my boss, but somehow we've become friends. He had the magic to pull people together like that. And this not only among people in the room, but people in Japan, in terms of clients in Japan that he mentored. And there were several who had offered condolences in Japanese, and I will pass them on to Mark, you, and to you, Scott, later on. But one of them was Fumio Takahashi, the publisher of Nihon Keizai Shimbun, or Nihon Keizai Publishing. He was the publisher of Nikkei Business Publications, and he was also the president of Nikkei Publishing Company. He's now retired. But as he was a correspondent in New York back in 1973-4, those years, and he'd actually interviewed Harold in 1974 and written an article, maybe the first Japanese article that talks about the reality of public relations in Japan. Public relations from the sense that it's not just publicity, it's not advertisement, it's really the conscience of a corporation. And when I told him about the passing of Harold, he said, I read the article again. What is in there is timeless. It still matters. It's timeless. There was another person, Takahito Sakakura of Kao Corporation, very much an equivalent of Unilever in Japan, a very global company. And he was the head of public relations. I told him the news. He said, look, I have to tell the people in my PR department. I have to tell, formally, and he's already gone to another department, so he said, I have to tell the people in the current PR department right away. He also said, I have to pass on the information to the former senior vice president, I think it was Nakagawa-san, SVP, who has since retired. And the comment that came back from Nakagawa-san was, we've lost a great man. So what he did, the talks that he had before trade organizations, the talks he had before business organizations, the talks that he had with our clients, it mattered. And in Japan too, people miss him. On January 6th, I was able to keep the promise of establishing my own company, a small company, one-person company, and I'll keep it that way. But I did not, and that was several days before Harold's passing. I'm glad that I was able to establish that company before his passing. That I feel relief. I did not keep the promise of putting my name to it. But, and I hope he's smiling. I named it Persuade, after his book of Persuasion. I hope he is smiling. Please don't get angry. But in what I do, as I have been while he was here, was to consistently ask, what would Harold do in this situation? How would Harold advise our client? How would he make a decision in this difficult circumstance? I mean, he's one of the compasses, or he's a major compass in my life, professionally and personally. So in that company, most probably I'll be consistently asking the question, what if Harold? Going back to the morning meeting in New York, there's one thing that I truly regret, and that was after a talk toward 12, when I really had to go, he had to go, he stood up from his wheelchair and he asked for the walker, and he walked me to the door. He walked me to the door, and he looked at me and said, as we shook hands, he said, "You know, Sherry, I'm coming to Japan." He said that. And I said, "Hmm?" And I smiled. But there was some sort of uneasy silence after that. There was a little bit of he had an uneasy, and I think he was thinking something. But then I offered, "Don't worry, we're going to bring you here. We're going to bring you to Japan. We're going to get a Project A team comprising Pat Ford, Don Bayer, comprising Curtis Chen and many others, as well as Wynn and Esther, and maybe Scott and Mark if you're coming in. We're going to surround you all, and we're going to put you on the plane, sit you on the plane, and take you to Japan." I regret not doing that. I hope he'll forgive me. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I thank the Burson family for the privilege of speaking today. Our nation and our university were enriched by Mr. Burson. We agree that in his 98 years, he made remarkable contributions. Today, as I said earlier, we celebrate his life. The American writer Wendell Berry is an agrarian, and he takes strolls through the area around Port Royal, Kentucky. And during one of those strolls, he came to an area where a spring was flowing water down a rocky slope, and he wrote this, and when I read it, honestly, I thought about Harold Burson. The title of this is A Native Hill, and it's a short story. And he says this: "Now I've come down within the sound of water. The winter has been rainy, and the hill is full of dark seeps and trickles, gathering finally along the creases into the flowing streams. The sound of them is one of the elements, and it defines the zone. When their voices return to the hill after their absence during summer and autumn, it is a better place to be. A thirst in the mind is quenched." Mr. Berry is a poet and a novelist and a writer of nonfiction and a writer of essays. And he's making wonderful contributions to our society, and I have a feeling that he and Mr. Harold Burson would have been friends if they'd known each other. Long before meeting Mr. Burson, I heard about him. He was sort of a legendary person at Ole Miss because he came here when he was 15. That's not the reason, but he happened to come here when he was 15. He created a legend by his life, his remarkable career. He was a very good student, and he was a very busy student journalist. During World War II, he reported for the Armed Services Network and later for the Nuremberg trials. He devoted his life to his family, to his friends, to his firm, and to his profession. He advised aspiring young journalists, and he was generous with that advice and his resources. He has been described as prominent, influential, and legendary. At the first event I ever attended at the Kennedy Center, I noted his name on the wall in the entrance, listed among other national and international dignitaries. Mr. Burson has been described by Public Week as the most influential public relations figure of the 20th century. He played a pivotal role in creating the concept of total communication strategies. During one of my visits to his New York office, he told me the following story. He said that when television mushroomed in the 50s, that his firm, your firm, represented a company that manufactured skill saw. Now, a skill saw is a hand saw that makes lots of noise and will cut thumbs off if you're not careful how you use it. But the challenge was going to be promoting that skill saw with the market having gone indoors to watch television. So Mr. Burson and his team developed a promotion that showed a male person, in this case, in a New York apartment using a skill saw to build a cabinet for his television set. That is creative, and he loved telling that story. The sale of that product skyrocketed, by the way. Burson Marsteller became the leading advertising marketing firm in the world. Mr. Burson and I really became friends during the Ole Miss 1997 struggle to distance the university from the divisive Confederate flag. I'd been advised that the flag was a deterrent in our pursuit of a chapter of Phi Beta Kappa. Our campus committee was struggling, and the opposition group was increasing fiery criticism, alleging that we were abandoning our heritage. I called Mr. Burson asking for his advice. He responded with an offer of assistance from his firm. He sent 3 bright associates to our campus, and we went to work. On occasion, I would call him when the press coverage would get pretty hot and the letters to the editor would get pretty hot and the calls to my office would get pretty hot. And I would say, Mr. Burson, the heck with it. Let's let them have the flag if they want it that badly. He says, no, Robert, we will win this fight. So he meant it. Even in the face of such difficult and challenging circumstances, he maintained his clear thinking and steady hand. He had a way of instilling courage. So we developed a plan. We implemented it, and over a period of 9 months, the issue was resolved. The funding that we needed to pay Burson Marsteller came from Dr. Jerry Hollingsworth. But it was Mr. Burson's resolve and love of the university that enabled us to prevail. I will always be grateful for his friendship, for his lifelong devotion to Ole Miss, and his enrichment of all of our lives. He is missed. Thank you.
I want to first start by thanking Scott, Mark, Judy for allowing me to speak on the behalf of caregivers. But I wasn't the only one. There was Tabitha, Joanne, they're here. And they love Mr. Burson dearly. And not only did they love him, they gave him the ultimate care. So I'm grateful just to be able to speak on the behalf of caregiver. How do you go from caregiver to a friend? Within the brief time that I have to share as Mr. Harold Burson, caregiver, Mr. Burson became a friend. Within the brief 3.5 months of our work experience together, we developed a relationship in which his influence over my life can only be measured in terms of a lifetime. My start-off day with Mr. Burson presented many things to learn. He was specific about his food. If it was to be hot, it couldn't be lukewarm, nearly hot. Hot was hot. His tea, it needed to have lemon. His water had to be cold. And in his cereals, he wanted 4 prunes.
and 10 blueberries and 1 pack of sweet and low. If you had more than 1 pack of sweet and low in there, he knew it. And at the end of every dinner, 6 scoops of rum raisin ice cream. When he came home, I started on Thursday, so that was the day of physical therapy. He was already there. So Friday had the opportunity to meet him at the office. So when he came home at the end of his workday, he had specific clothes that he wanted to put on. My first day there, he asked me to go in there in the closet and bring him a sports shirt and a pair of khakis. I went in there looking for a 49er shirt, Dallas Cowboy shirt, because those were sports shirts to me. I said, describe the sports shirt. So I come in there with a handful of shirts, and he got frustrated. And I said, well, I tell you what, Mr. Harold, if you come and show me the sports shirt, I won't make that mistake again. That was the beginning of our relationship. An eager student wanting to learn, and a very enthusiastic teacher wanting to teach. During our times of driving to and fro from his speaking engagement, we would often talk. And before we get into the speaking engagement conversation, we had to get past all the trees that was in Memphis. He was just fascinated with the trees because they wasn't here when he left for New York. And then we had to get past of the story, if you went past east of Highland, you was up to no good. We were first to discuss topics, and I once asked him, I said, how do you prepare for your speaking engagements? And he said, Eddie, people don't want to hear the rules of truth. They want to hear stories. He said, what I do, I pack truth in stories, my own life story. Mr. Burson taught me about life as he shared so willingly his life story. To my surprise, there were times that he requested my perspective on issues. He would listen very carefully, and he commended and he thanked me for my response. It was at that moment I began to realize more and more as a caregiver, I was becoming a friend. Many persons describe Mr. Burson's worth in terms of his financial holding, but he personally spoke to me of his value in terms of providing opportunity for men and women to have a job. Have a job with a decent income that will provide life and opportunities for their family. He said, Eddie, I don't see colors. I see men and women. He once described our relationship to the head of the physical therapy department, not as a caregiver, but he said, Eddie is like a brother to me. He said, it's because of him that I remain optimistic about walking again. One day, about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, while laying in bed, he had some medically ordered boots that would keep his heel from having pressure on them in the bed. And he asked me, he said, Eddie, he says, remove those boots for me. I said, Mr. Harold, I can't do that. I said, those are medically ordered. He said, well, Eddie, if you can't do it, I guess you're no longer part of the team. I said, well, Mr. Harold, I guess not. And so after showering him, getting him ready for the day, he asked me to put some cream on his back. I said, well, Mr. Harold, I sure hope that that person that's going to take my place on the team can do a little better than I can. And his response was, Eddie, we've been together too long and shared too much for us to end this relationship over 5 minutes of me wanting to have my way. In closing, my brief time with you today cannot describe the depths of our relationship and the immense impact that his life of 98 years had on each of us here and the generation to come. A life of excellency. I wondered, why did God allow my path to cross with a man that had walked with presidents, queens, dignitaries? What was I supposed to take from this? First thing I took from it was, even though he walked with all them, he never lost his touch with the common man. Because of his life of excellency, I wondered why he rolled up his belt every day and put it in the same place. Pulled off his watch. I always thought it was a girl watch. Put it in the same place every day. Put his billfold in the same drawer. Needed a bottle of water. Shoes in the same place. I wonder why. Because he lived a standard of excellency. And when you live a standard of excellency, you set a goal for yourself and you expect for others to follow. And some of us set goals, but we don't live up to the expectation. He lived up to it. On my way to my seat, after leaving one of his doctor's appointment one day, he was sharing with the ear doctor about who he was, and she didn't believe him. And he got his Cadillac Walker and looked back at her and said, if you don't believe me, Google me.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Burson, Harold Burson's older son. I'd like to thank the University of Mississippi, the musicians that opened the program, and the very perceptive and loving comments that have been made about my father. I'm going to try not to repeat things, but I will try to share a few words about our father from the perspective of his children. I think outside of the plays of Sam Shepard, most kids will think of their fathers in heroic terms. Most kids grow out of it. Mark and I had the opposite experience of having to grow into it because as time went on and we became more mature, we were able to recognize that our dad, truly, was a great man, and that greatness wasn't just in the household in which he lived, but it really reached around the world. It's interesting in thinking of my father as a heroic figure, because he really wasn't Hollywood casting's idea of a hero. He didn't look or act the part. In fact, he was small of stature, soft-spoken, with a touch of Southern courtesy in his speech, and remarkably unassuming. Now, I know those of you who knew him later in life, and Eddie with the Google Me, know that at a certain point he came to a place where he could kind of enjoy and relax into what he had accomplished, and I don't hold that against him. But I have to say that the father I grew up with through the 60s and the 70s, and even through the mid-80s, was an extremely modest, extremely self-effacing person, and that was one of the things that, as Don Bear said, proved a surprise for people, because Dad just didn't claim the stage. Mark and I lived a very comfortable upper middle class life, but there was nothing flashy about it. My dad drove a 1961 Volkswagen for 17 years. It endured until my brother drove it into a ditch when the brakes failed because the brake lines had rusted out. It being the Northeast. My mom drove Pontiacs. For the 2 years she had a Mercedes, she was the unhappiest woman in the world. I never heard my father raise his voice. He rarely uttered a profanity. In fact, I can't remember him doing it, but I suspect he did, so I'm not going to claim he didn't. But if people want to know where I learned how to swear, it was from my mom, who could swear like a pirate. My dad really modeled the life he wanted us to live as dependable providers and people of integrity, a person with high aspirations and being in constant and diligent pursuit of those aspirations. I think that a number of speakers have capitalized what my father expressed to me as one of his, or perhaps the preeminent pleasure and joy of his life, which was assisting others in realizing their potential. He took enormous pride in creating a company of worldwide scope that provided employment for thousands of people, and he took enormous pleasure in the professional accomplishments of people who had somehow touched his life, and that certainly extended beyond their experience with Burson Marsteller if they left. He really wanted to see everybody that he touched, become the best of what they were capable of. My mother and father financed the educations of more than a dozen people. I'm sure I don't know about everybody whose college education he did pay, but Dad was committed to investing in people, and he didn't brag about it, but you know, he did it, and there are a lot of people who are enjoying opportunities specifically because of the generosity of my parents. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody in this room that my father's primary joy and focus was in his work, which he loved beyond words, counseling clients, creating jobs, mentoring people into productive careers, the ebb and flow of his business, that was really what motivated and energized him, and that was his focus. He was quite open about this, and at my mother's 2010 memorial service, and in his recent book, The Art of Persuasion, he was candid about the primacy of his profession to his life. And he was also candid about the second and third priorities, which were devotion to my mother and his love of his West Highland White Terriers, which I am proud to say he credits me with having selected the breed. I hadn't remembered that from The Art of Persuasion, but he called me out on it, and I'll take it. It was never clear whether it was the dogs or my mother's who were second and third in his devotion. I know very well what my mother would have said. And his fourth priority, and I believe he did take true joy in this, was Mark, me, and his broader family. But we live in a pecking order. We knew where we were. My dad was frank about the fact that he delegated primary child-raising responsibility to our mother. From 1952 through 1970, when I went to college, my dad was away from home 3 to 4 nights every week. I questioned, I mean, that's my emotional memory, and I questioned its accuracy, and I saw in The Art of Persuasion that he said he was out of the house more than half of the nights of the week. But he and I, our memories coincide that he was rarely out of the house on weekends, except when he was traveling to Europe or to Asia. He frequently came home, where he would experience what to him was togetherness with his family, typically working at his desk in the room where our television was, while my brother and I watched television, and there was no human interaction, but somehow he drew a tremendous emotional strength from that. Starting in the 70s, when his business grew internationally, Dad averaged more than 100,000 miles of annual travel over 25 years. And in 4 of those years, he traveled more than 400,000 miles. He was a great source of frequent flyer miles, but we didn't see a lot of him. In a way, my father's business legacy has left me and my brother with thousands of half-siblings, and it's an honor for us to share my dad with you. My father is one of the very few people I can think of who accomplished pretty much everything that they wanted to do. He didn't make it to 100, but that's just a number. I find it remarkable how self-effacing his ambition was in light of his accomplishments, but I believe it truly was a formula for greatness. Thank you.
Please join me if you're so moved. The 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, 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 oh, the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. O Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells, rise up. For you the flag is hung, for you the bugle trills. For you bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Hear, Captain, dear father, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, he has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells. But I with mournful tread walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen cold and dead.
As we prepare to close today, on behalf of the family, I just want to send out a great thank you for them, for each one of you that has come out today and spoke about Mr. Burson. I tell you, it's like he's here. It's what it's about. It's a celebration of his life and his accomplishments and what he did. And not only that, what he believed and what he thought and how he lived. The fact that I said earlier that I did not know Mr. Burson, I feel like he's a man that anybody could know. Anybody could know. Watching the videos and listening to the interviews that he did on the internet and reading the articles about him, all the things that were said here today about your grandfather and your father, a very humble and a very caring man. They all come to light. And that's what this celebration is about. It's about knowing Harold Burson. I'm going to offer a prayer. I'm going to read a couple of verses and offer a prayer. And then the University String Quartet will play the alma mater, and we will be dismissed from here. The family invites each one of you to come to the Lyceum for a reception afterwards. So please join them for that reception. Psalms 100 says, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. Know ye that the Lord, he is God. It is he that hath made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people, and the sheep of his pasture. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving, and into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him, and bless his name. For the Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endureth to all generations." So many things in that talk about Harold. And the family, what they wrote about his meeting with his lovely Betty Ann. He couldn't wait to meet her, I'm sure. And what a great reunion that is when we meet our loved ones there. Our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this celebration today and the honor and the memories that were bestowed about Harold Burson. We pray your blessings on this family, Lord. We pray you watch over them, you guide them, you strengthen them, Lord, in all that they do. In your name we pray. Amen.